Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining the March 26th, 2022 Zoning and Planning meeting of INC. It's good to see everybody. We have a very exciting topic today that the city started working on in January of this year. And we have two speakers. The person who I think is going to present mostly is Sarah Cawrse. Good morning, Sarah. And with her is Liz Weigle, who many of you already know from these Colfax work. So thank you for joining us. And I think I've given you the ability to share your screen.
Yes. Yeah, so I have prepared a shorter presentation, maybe between 5 and 10 minutes, and then we can have opportunity for question and discussion as well, if that sounds good.
Well, if you think you can bite this off in 5 or 10 minutes, that's great. The
presentation part.
Okay, we'll try
All
it.
Right.
Thank
Cool.
you.
Thanks. All right, I'll share my screen. Give me just 1 second. All right, so yeah, as you guys are aware, there's this Advancing Equity and Rezoning project going on right now, and I'm Sarah Cawrse. I'm the project manager of it, and Liz Weigle is also on the project as more leadership representation and to give her expert advice as well. So I think I want to take a step back and look at sort of what informed this project in the first place. So we have two major citywide plans. We have our Comp Plan 2040, which that has 6 vision elements in it. And there's one that really sticks out that sort of is a little bit of a driver for the project. And that's the vision element number 1, to create an equitable, affordable, and inclusive city. We also have Blueprint Denver. And within Blueprint Denver, there were 3 equity concepts identified, those 3 there: improving access to opportunity, reducing vulnerability to displacement, and expanding housing and jobs diversity. So looking more specifically in Blueprint Denver, there was language in there that provided some direction for this project. The first is that Blueprint stated that the city should consider adjustments to the applicant-driven rezoning process to better address the important topics revealed by those 3 equity concepts. The other suggestion was to create tools to increase access to the rezoning process, especially for underrepresented communities. So that's a little bit of what set the framework for the project. The city's already doing a few things related to equity as well, and implementing our plan recommendations. So the first thing that we're doing is an equity analysis. And we do this on typically larger projects or rezonings. We also do an equity analysis during the rezoning pre-application stage for rezonings located in nest neighborhoods. So that is a little bit of something that we've gotten started and something that can be considered as part of this project when it moves forward. And then now we're of course doing this Advancing Equity and Rezoning process or project, which will look at the rezoning process in its entirety as well. So first, as a reminder, you guys know CPD has 2 different types of work. The first type is our planning work. We'll do extensive community outreach and engagement and eventually develop a plan. And those plans are the policy documents that set the framework under which future decisions are made. But then we have our other work, which is our regulatory work. And that's where we're creating or updating rules and regulations that inform land use as well as development. And we have a variety of tools that kind of create these regulations and requirements. And the biggest tool is the Denver Zoning Code, which provides a little bit more of that prescriptive approach to our built environment. So considering that, this project is a regulatory project, so we're implementing recommendations in our plan. And the final outcome will be a text amendment to the Denver Zoning Code. So that's kind of a little bit of what this project will be. Essentially, this project is trying to answer the question of how should the rezoning process change? That's the big question here. And as we know, to understand the rezoning process, we also need to make sure people understand the role of zoning in itself, because rezoning is changing a zone district to a different zone district. So I think you guys are very familiar with zoning, but just in case, zoning essentially controls what you can and cannot do with your property. It controls how tall buildings can be and location of parking, as well as building transparency and entrances and other design standards, as well as uses that happen within the building. So right now, the majority of development and changes that you see going on in Denver occur under the existing entitlement or zone district. So if a property owner owns a building that's 3 stories, but it's zoned to allow 8 stories, then that property owner could build 8 stories under the existing entitlement. So that means the other 10% of development occurs after rezoning. So meaning the property owner developer pursues a rezoning so that something different can be allowed or developed on that property. Even though a smaller portion of development occurs after rezoning, we're starting with updating the rezoning process because it's important and involves a public process already and requires a vote from City Council. So we're focusing on the rezoning process specifically. So a rezoning is essentially the process of changing the zone district of a property. So for example, if this property is zoned to allow a residential duplex, it could rezone to allow something like this, like a 3-story building with retail on the first floor and office on the upper floors. So back to this project, the general project purpose is to evaluate the existing rezoning process and criteria to understand how they may be modernized and better advance Blueprint Denver's equity concepts. So we've developed 3 overarching goals or focus areas for the project right now. The first is to ensure that this project looks at updating the rezoning process so that it's transparent, equitable, and accessible for all. The second is to focus on identifying rezoning review criteria that inform better decisions and achieve citywide goals. And then the third is to focus on creating potentially requirements that respond to the varied equity impacts of rezonings. So those are the 3 overarching goals so far that have been developed. How that translates is there's also 3 main areas that this project can have an impact on the rezoning process. So in summary, we can have an impact on what the process is, its requirements, as well as the materials for it. It can impact the rezoning review criteria, which essentially is used to evaluate a rezoning request and eventually lead to a vote of recommendation or denial, or approval or denial. And then the last is looking at those equitable outcomes or those additional things that could be incorporated into this process that might inform different outcomes as well. So we know this project will focus on equity. And when we think about equity for this project, it might mean a lot of different things. So I want to give a couple different examples of what equity could mean when we're thinking about the rezoning process specifically. So first, equity could mean creating a more transparent and understandable process. For example, do we have understandable requirements for a rezoning application? Or do we need to better communicate what the rezoning process entails and how people can voice their opinion on rezoning? Another example is equity may mean incorporating meaningful notification and awareness of rezonings. Do we need to change who gets notified of rezonings and how? Or it can mean providing different opportunities for engagement. For example, do there need to be other ways community members can engage in the rezoning process? Another example is that equity could mean calibrating the rezoning fees. For example, should we have different fees depending on who applies for rezoning? So this project is anticipated to be about a year long, and it kicked off this winter, and we're hoping to have it starting to wrap up by next winter as well. So we've headed into the kickoff of the project, and throughout the first 6 phases of the project is where we're going to anticipate most of our community engagement and outreach. So we'll anticipate monthly task force meetings, as well as a couple community meetings and other outreach as well. Which, speaking of outreach, I want to give you a quick snapshot of what we're planning to do with this project. It doesn't include all of the community outreach and engagement, but this is some of the high-level things that we'll be doing. So as I mentioned, we have a task force, and that task force meets monthly. And we also have a couple people here today that are on our task force. We have Lou Raiders as well as Joel Noble that's on our task force. We're also planning on doing focused outreach. For example, that might mean focus groups, office hours, or other types of engagement. And then we'll be doing broader outreach, which includes those community meetings, as well as things like surveys. And then we'll make sure to be briefing our planning board, as well as give updates to City Council. And then another thing that we'll use a lot is our webpage. So look to our webpage to see updates about events that the project's having, or just general updates and information about the project as well. And we'll be using things like social media, newsletters, and sending out emails to give other updates about the project. So looking ahead, we've had a couple task force meetings, a couple focus group meetings, and then we're we're going to have our first community meeting on April 5th. And at that meeting, that's where we'll give an overview of the project. We'll discuss what we've heard so far. We'll also make people aware of other ways to stay engaged, and we'll be looking to receive feedback on the draft issues and goals that have sort of been developed from what we've heard so far. And we'd like to get additional input on that at the community meeting. And then the other thing is we're planning a couple of focus group meetings. And we have 3 meetings that we've sort of developed 3 different topics. And we're looking for people, if you're interested in being on these focus groups, that's great. The first topic is looking at barriers and challenges for applicants. We also have a focus group looking at barriers and challenges as a community member. And then we'd like to have a focus group that discusses potential successes and opportunities. There's more information about that on our webpage. And if people are interested in being on a focus group, we have an interest form on our webpage that someone can fill out and submit their interest for that as well. So that is the quick summary. And again, you can visit our website for more information. I'll stop sharing my screen, and then Liz and I are here for questions and discussion.
So Sarah, I thought I would ask a couple of broad questions because I've been looking at the site. And my first is, would you, either one of you, be able to give a little more explanation about why you're not just calling this a new zoning code? Because I know you're doing a lot in chapter 12 and it may impact a lot of other articles, article 12. So I'm just looking for a background on who framed it and why you framed it, and then what definition you used for equity. Did you use the blueprint definition? And then the third question that I just think would be helpful for people, if you could put up the 2 sections, the 2 pages in blueprint that you cite in the project background document as that CPD used to form the basis of this. I just think it might be helpful for people to see those 2 excerpts. So.
All right, so just so I catch that, because that was 3 different questions. The first was wondering a little bit about why is it not looking at maybe a new zone district, and kind of a little bit more about where the project came from. Or at least I'll start going with that. So as I mentioned, this project will update the rezoning process. So it's not creating any new zone districts or any new zoning, but it will update the requirements or the processes for rezoning itself. And I think I mentioned, and we'll put the pages of Blueprint Denver in the chat, I think shortly, but Blueprint Denver sort of sets the stage for some of the work that we're doing, because we want to be implementing our plans. So we're looking at Blueprint Denver, the suggestions it gives, and taking what Blueprint Denver says, as well as our comp plan, and incorporating that into our project. I think this project has been elevated to be quite an important project, because if you've attended planning board or city council, a significant amount of time is spent on rezonings. And so we want to learn what's going on with rezonings and figure out how we could make this process better or improve it, because maybe the process isn't as good as it could be, and there could be opportunities for improvement as well. And then again, Liz, if you want to chime in on anything, that would be great. And then you might have to remind me of the second question, but Liz, if you want to tag on to anything to that response.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure it's clear to everybody that this process, and I know we have multiple projects going on in CPD, and you probably get updates on other ones as well, but in this process, we are not changing the zoning on any property, and we're not changing the standards in a zone district. Like you mentioned, Christine, Article 12 is what regulates how the rezoning process works, and that's where the changes may be focused in there. So what's required to be submitted, what are the steps in the rezoning process? So it's that part of this. So notification, those pieces are what we're really looking at. So how do you rezone a property, but not we will not be rezoning an actual property through this process. If that makes sense.
Yeah. So it basically came from planning board talking to CPD, talking to city council. So Joel and Laura and there's 2 city council members that are on it.
Yeah, I would say, so we updated Blueprint Denver in 2019, and it has a number of recommendations in it. And as Sarah highlighted, and we can pull those up, there's specific ones about updating our rezoning process. So as we look to implement the various recommendations in our plan, these are some of the ones there, and we've seen and we've heard kind of frustration with our rezoning process from community members. And as Sarah mentioned, it is a place where we really do have that public engagement piece that happens in our hearings now. And there's the ability to make sure that our processes really are keeping up with what we say are our goals in the city to further equity and to make sure that folks are engaged.
Okay, I think I'm going to go on to someone else, but I would like it if you could put those
Sure.
snapshot of those 2 pages up that are in the project report. It would just be useful. And then we'll get to the equity thing later, but the definition that you're using. Miles, did you have a question?
Yes, just a quick question. I'm trying to get caught up on this. So can you tell me, it sounds like from what Sarah just said, thank you for presenting this, that it looks like it's an issue of time. So is one of your goals to make rezoning simpler and easier for city council, or they don't have to approve it? Or because that was kind of mentioned, and the other question too is this coming from the developers that this process is too difficult and the city wants to help them facilitate a faster rezone of these properties when they want to redevelop? So I guess the question too is, where did this come from and where is this going? Is it to shorten the process? And so that would be my first question.
Yeah, so there's no direct intent to shorten it. I think through this project, we'll discover how we can improve and update the rezoning process and also look at it from an equity lens as well. So I think something to always consider is that right now, if you look at our review criteria for rezonings, so some of the biggest review criteria is consistency with adopted plans. So we want to make sure rezonings are consistent with our adopted plans, which essentially reflect our citywide or neighborhood goals as well. So rezonings essentially facilitate that implementation of our plans. So that will be considered as part of this process, is what is the purpose of rezonings in the first place? And then we'll be evaluating the process from the notification requirements to how people get engaged or stay engaged with rezonings themselves, including submitting public input and things like that. So we'll be considering everything that's going on today and what updates we can make to improve the process in general, but then also look at it from an equity lens. And then this is not coming from developers that would like to go through the rezoning process quicker. Again, I'll point back to the suggestion of Blueprint Denver. This is part of our citywide goals, and this was a project that's been identified through one of our citywide plans, and then it's been discussed through leadership, city council, and planning board, and then eventually became a project.
So in setting your goals, you said it's to improve the process. Can you define what that means? I guess I'm just trying to understand. So I guess in understanding what your goal is, part of it would be is to measure, has this been successful? So what would that measure be? Is it a time measure? Is it an engagement measure? And then another question too is, in using the word equity, how is this process using those principles? How is this outreach and engaging in this? Because it looks like it's going to be less than a year. How is that equitable for the community to understand these processes and these concepts? How have you integrated that into this process of these changes?
Yeah, so I think some of your first questions, that is feedback we'd like to hear, because I can't answer those questions because we're just starting this project. And that's where we want to hear feedback from you guys to understand what issues do you think are happening with the rezoning process? What should we look at? What should be incorporated as part of our goals and objectives and then addressed through this project in general? So that's why I can't answer it, but hopefully the end of this project, we'll be able to answer your questions of where is it headed, you know, and kind of where are the goals eventually. And then with the kind of the equity principles of this project, I think that's good feedback. I know this was maybe perceived as a shorter project. I think we get a lot of different feedback, but I think usually people might suggest that some of our processes are a little bit slower than desired, but this was kind of just initially set out as the framework for the project. But again, we'll do the community outreach and engagement that's needed to ensure that it's successful as well. So that's just at this moment the suggested schedule.
Okay, just a quick follow-up and then I'll be done. So just from your response, it is a little concerning that you're opening up the process. You don't necessarily have a goal. You just want to make it better using equity. And you're spending a lot of the city's resources on this and time and energy that I would almost want an analysis of why the project started. You know, what are you shooting for? What are the bullet points? Why are city council going to be involved in these meetings? That's all. That would be my concern, is what is the clear outcome that you're after? Because it makes your job easier too. And it makes engaging with the public easier if you know exactly what you're after and why you're after it. That would be my last comment. Thank you.
Okay, Ian.
Well, thank you, and thank you for your presentation. I'll try not to ask 3 questions in a row because I want to make sure that other people get a chance. But I mean, I share some of the same questions here as I was writing this down about what does success mean? Is that somebody stopping a rezoning in their community that they didn't want, or is it someone successfully moving through it faster? I guess I'm also concerned, this is my concern, that I think it's the 3rd task force meeting and you're about to have a community meeting and you're doing outreach to us. And I don't know, yeah, where we're going with this. I mean, I sat on Blueprint and I appreciate the equity goals. One of the things I heard you say was possibly the cost of rezoning. So maybe people who are in, I don't know, neighborhoods for displacement, maybe it would become easier for them to build wealth that way. I don't know. But, you know, my question again, it comes back to the success one of like, who's determining success?
I would just.
Is that the first question?
So.
Okay, go ahead, Liz, if you had.
I was just going to jump in that way. I think Sarah spoke to those goals, and we are in that issue identification and goal defining phase of this project. So I would certainly encourage all of you to participate in the community meeting or a focus group. But the goal is to make sure that it's a transparent, accessible process, and then particularly for those folks who are traditionally left out of our processes. So part of this is defining what is making it difficult today for folks to participate, or for, you know, some things we hear about is for maybe more mission driven, like an affordable housing project or something like that, might have a really hard time getting through a process, or a small property owner has a hard time just even understanding what's going on in the process. So we're trying to understand what are the challenges we hear today, like that are happening today. That's the step we're at, and defining together about where we're trying to go. And then we will get to kind of ideas around solutions to that we'll want to share with the community. But we are in this first phase of issue identification.
So if I'm hearing it right, it sounds a little like success then is the applicant being able to get what they to get to a project at the end of rezoning, then whether that be a small neighborhood project. And I'm also hearing community engagement improvements, which I can totally get behind. And I think certainly something that, you know, we delayed Blueprint Denver over the fact that only 2% of the respondents were Black from our communities, right? And that took another 6 months for those focus groups. So, you know, in relation to spreading the word, I saw that you had a sign up there for people to sign up to learn about this. And is that being successful, and how can INC help you there?
We would love for you to share that, or if you have particular organizations, we're also doing a lot of work to try to reach out to place people who've been involved in rezonings before or in particular neighborhoods, or organizations that we've worked for to really get folks to come either to community meeting or participate in one of those focus groups. So if you have connections to particular organizations that you could spread that word with, we would really appreciate that.
I think, you know, we said this as partners to INC for a long time, is that like, show us the list that you do have so we can tell you who's missing from it. Because I feel like so often we start this process over and over and over again with different sets of government employees and or highly paid contractors who are, it feels like there's not like a master list inside the city you start with, and then we can try to fill it in. Or if it's like, hey, we really want to reach this group, you could call us and say, do you have relationships where you could make the one-on-one connection? You know, I think that those are a great way for us to be partners.
Okay,
Great. Thank you. We can follow up
thank
with you
you.
on that.
How about we go to David Pardo?
Hey, yes. So I guess my first question really coming from having watched a lot of city council meetings and been to Ludi and seeing what the rezone process looks like. The one thing that obviously, this is more feedback than a question. The thing that comes to mind is that I think it's a little bit ridiculous that somebody looking to rezone like 20 plus acres at Denargo Market is going through a process that somebody trying to go from SUC to SUC1, that those are in any way, shape, or form like related, the paperwork involved. One of them is an owner trying to add an ADU. The other one is somebody building what is likely to be like $1 billion worth of real estate. And so to me, the biggest thing is to really look at this and go, okay, what, you know, if a developer is looking to do $1 billion project, that it's going to cost a lot more money. And that if somebody's trying to add an ADU, that maybe it doesn't have to go through all of these steps and processes, and that we can streamline things for something small like that. Or if somebody wants to go from SU to TU, then maybe today's process makes some sense, or maybe it can be streamlined a little bit. Whereas, you know, going from, you know, industrial to MX16, you know, that's a totally different animal. So that's the one piece of feedback that I have is, in my mind, what makes sense is making it equitable based upon what it is that somebody's actually trying to do, not have the rezone process be effectively the same for everybody. On that note, you know, talking about streamlining, thus far, I don't know of any ADU rezones that haven't gone through. Maybe it happened once or twice. But the idea that that has to be brought up at council and go through this long process when entire neighborhoods are doing it all at once, to me, that seems like a place where we as a city could improve and speed up and make this a lot more useful to everyone. The idea that we're going to spend as much time on one ADU as we will on Denargo Market, like, just seems wrong. So that's it. Just that piece of feedback as you move forward.
Yeah, thank you, David, for that. That's great feedback. That's what we've been hearing as well. As could there be an opportunity to have maybe some variation with the process or some different things that happen with the process? We're also doing peer city research, talking to other cities to learn about what their rezoning processes are and understanding, are there things that we could learn from them? And it has been interesting. Some other cities do things like that, where maybe it's a certain square footage or unit count that triggers some other type of review or something else, you know, additional in the rezoning process. So yeah, we're definitely going to look at that and evaluate, you know, what we could consider here as well.
Before Adrian goes, I just want to give a plug for next month, April 23rd. We had invited Josh Palmieri, who's heading up the citywide ADU discussion that's brand new. It just started last month, and he will be here next month. So David, get the word out. Okay, Adrian.
Yes, thank you, and thank you for the city for coming and alerting of this early. It's great to get that feedback. I want to talk a little bit about unintended consequences, following up on some of the earlier comments. The process of rezoning in Denver is currently brutal and acts as a real discouragement for anybody, developer, homeowner, contractor seeking rezoning. As a result, I believe we have too little rezoning, particularly to densify the city over what it was originally zoned for, which is desperately needed for affordability. I'd strongly recommend the task group looks at ways to speed up zoning, reduce the cost, and make the process accessible to the little builders and people, not just the out-of-town giants. Are you going to do that?
I think that's great feedback because I know we hear conflicting feedback as well of like, are we trying to help developers go faster, or like your advice is like, maybe there should be a more streamlined process so we can ensure certain things happen. So, you know, as we go through the process, we'll figure out what needs to happen. And I will just point back, because I know Joel has brought up this feedback as well, and I think Planning Board and others have suggested things where currently there's some opportunities for more proactive rezonings, and some city council members are also doing things like that where they're rezoning an entire neighborhood, for example. So Amanda Sandoval is doing that in Northwest Denver, looking at rezoning entire neighborhood to allow ADUs and things like that. And I think that's one way to get a little bit more towards what you're suggesting as well. But that's feedback that we love to hear, and we want to figure out kind of how do we provide this balance of making sure the rezoning process is equitable, we have appropriate engagement, things like that. But then also still going back to the city's goals is like, how can we better implement the goals? And, you know, yeah, I guess, I don't know, Liz, if you want to add on to that.
Yeah, I would just add, and and Sarah's right. I think that they're, you know, we're you know, we'll be balancing varied feedback, but I think overall goal is for it to be predictable, right? So one example we were just talking about, if there is a different process that's needed for different types of rezonings, we should be very clear about that going in, or what types of engagement are required. So that right now there's a lot that happens with some developers are really good about reaching out to community members and working with them. Other ones, you know, despite being encouraged, don't do as much. So how can we make that more predictable for everybody, so that there are the opportunities for the feedback, but that also the property owner, the community member all know what is involved in the process and can be better engaged? I think is an improvement that we're definitely seeking.
Thank you. Eleni?
Yeah, hi. Yeah, thanks for coming to INC. I, like Christine, Ian, and Miles, have some really serious questions about how you define equity. I find it's very easy to throw that word out there, and it is not really defined or even understood. So if equity is going to assist large-scale developers in doing more outreach to the community, when you they're steward through the entire zoning process, you have a staff that's assigned to assist and help them prepare their application for rezoning. However, if I, as a homeowner, wanted to decide that my house is historic and file an application, or even do it a historic district, I would get I'd get an application, I'd meet with someone for a few minutes, but no one's going to steward my application through the process and review it and help me get on city council and help me make a better application and tell me all the steps. So that is just one example. Second, my other comment would be, if you haven't watched the INC meeting from January, where there was a presentation, Laura Aldrete was on, of GES Coalition presented, Alfonso Espino and Nola Miguel, and talked about, really, as a community that's been disenfranchised, displacement, disinvested, and has been consistently ignored, and talked about how do we move from that? What does equity look like? And it talked about, or they presented, that it's really a partnership. They're seeking a partnership with the city. And so I don't hear that language at all in this discussion about how the city is going to really look at us as the client, not the developer as the client, but the people of the city and county of Denver. and not just some of the people, all of the people. And so I really feel that without those types of discussions, we're missing, to Miles' point, what's the goal? If we haven't defined some of those things early on, it's very easy for this process to turn into, hey, how do we make a better form? How do we streamline a process? And then it just ends up being, we updated the forms and it's great. And it's easy for developers, to fill out, and we have more staff for them to assist them because they're complaining about the process. So I see that, as really an issue. And if you're really concerned about diversity and equity and inclusion and accessibility, why would you have a meeting? You had one of your meetings just a couple days ago, which was on the same day that we had the Park Hill Golf Course meeting, where many people of color were in attendance of that meeting. So really looking at how you're engaging people, not having meetings on top of meetings so that people cannot attend, is in and of itself not inclusive, not accessible, not diverse, and not equitable. And so I think you have to look at history to understand what equity would mean. And where is the historical analysis of people who have not been included in the process, like GES Coalition and other neighborhood groups who have actually bore that burden of displacement at a disproportionate amount? Where are they in this discussion, and why aren't they framing the argument, but rather we're hearing developers need it to be faster? And I'm sure that's what they want. That's not a surprise to me. It costs them money probably to do this, but they have the money. That's why they're a for-profit.
Yeah, so I want to just call out a quick correction. I know the Park Hill Golf Course meeting was the same day as the Advancing Equity and Rezoning Task Force meeting. They were not at the same time, so there was an opportunity if someone wanted to call in to the task force meeting, they could have attended that and also gone to the Park Hill Golf Course meeting. So we're doing the best we can to not schedule things on top of each other. I know that's on the same day, but our task force meeting is a reoccurring meeting. And so if another meeting happens to schedule once ours has already been scheduled, then there's not much our team can do about that, but we'll definitely look at, we're trying to make sure that people can attend all the meetings that they can as well. And then when you're thinking about equity, I think we do have a broad perspective of voices and representation on the task force, but that is just one opportunity for engagement. We're doing these focus groups. We're reaching out best we can with people working with Sita Baca's district and others and other organizations to try to really get people involved in this process. And so again, I'll task you guys if you know of anyone else we should be reaching out to help us spread the word, because I think that is really what helps us as well. And I guess that's all I have to say to that.
And finally, one point I will add is that hopefully, unlike your other neighborhood plans and your other presentations, all of your documents are in a multitude of languages, which for whatever reason, we could never get that in East Central or East area. We could not get the plan documents. We finally, after yelling for almost a year, got a one-page flyer. So a 280-page plan was boiled down to one sentence. That is not equity, that's not inclusion. And again, without defining those terms up front and saying, hey, at a minimum, these are the things we're going to do in advance of this planning process, then you can see how things, people are trying, we're not even invited at the table. People are feeling left out from the get-go. If you have not made a strategic analysis up front of what does equity look like, what are the things that are non-starters? Like, these are the things we won't do. Here are the things we absolutely will do. And we're just not hearing that. So it feels like another kind of we're going to call it equitable, and we're going to use a really important term, and we're going to water it down and tell people this is what equity looks like. And for me, that just feels like very uncomfortable and a misuse of the term, because I feel like maybe you all have done the homework, but I haven't heard that from you. I haven't heard that sort of goal setting, analysis, historical context, what groups you're gonna, you're asking us to help you define those groups, and we're happy to help, but it sounds like you've already had this process going on for a few months. So we're trying to jump on board, but still without a clear-cut direction. That's hard to get that implemented, and then you want it done by the end of the year, and we're already almost in April, so that's the challenge.
So I see Joel has his hand up, but let's first ask if Liz and Sarah can address Lou's question. Please discuss the importance of neighborhood plans, rezoning to implement plans as opposed to changing any such plans. Predictability is important, and this process will not make changes to neighborhood plans. I don't know if it's a question, but would you like to do that, or you want to leave the plan discussion to Joel? That's his favorite topic, I know.
I would just have, and Lou is on our task force as well, so thanks for joining today, Lou. I think, and you could jump in if I'm not capturing this correctly, but I think that what Sarah was mentioning in the beginning of that, we have different types of planning work, and one big piece of it is our not just neighborhood planning, but our planning policy setting work, which we called out what some of the guidance was in Blueprint Denver related to the rezoning process. And we also have neighborhood plans that are a key piece of that rezoning criteria today. So when we have a rezoning come forward, we're looking at whether it is consistent with our neighborhood plans. So yes, the intention of these updates is not to say we're going to change our neighborhood plans, or we're going to kind of revisit discussions that happen within, with many people engaged in them. But it's really about making sure that we have the right process to make sure our plans are implemented, and that we're really looking at those, to Alani's point, the equity impact. So we've been starting to do equity analysis. That's a big guidance that we have in Blueprint Denver, and we want to make sure we truly are implementing our plans. We're not changing our plans, but are we implementing our plans through this process? And Lou, did you want to explain further what you were saying there?
Yeah, and Ian did ask me in the chat to share my thoughts so far. I do think it's early in the process, because it is important, at least being a member of the task force and watching how the group, the task force itself, is being brought together and asked to really think about what this means and what equity means. And I think some of the thoughts from the last meeting, we've only had 3, making sure that there is a shared understanding of equity in the context. And, my own perception is, while it is moving fast, the first part has been really focused on making sure that there are shared understandings of both what is required in Blueprint, and to make sure that we gather the kinds of questions about what equity means in the process. We're not changing plans, we're not changing the actual zoning code, but if plans can be utilized or process can be looked at to help people get to those plan implementations quicker, maybe less expensive for smaller projects. I mean, a lot of this discussion today has been a part of that discussion. So I do think the concerns and the comments are parallel to what I'm hearing today, and have been picked up by committee members. So Ian, I think I've been very impressed with the way that the process has gone so far, in terms of really making sure that people on the committee are heard. And I do think what is being heard is some of what I'm hearing today. Hopefully that is helpful. But I did want to just, and Joel may want to add a little bit. I think sometimes people think, well, this is a process that's going to have all these huge changes. And I don't see it that way. And I don't think the committee sees it that way, because we keep coming back to process. And is there a way to build more equity in that process? Can we really look at, if we've got a huge affordable housing project, can we do things to streamline? Because those are usually done with, multiple capital stacks that include tax credits and other things, and they are nonprofits. Do we treat that differently than we do, the huge 13-acre east-west project that is strictly for profit? So understanding uses gives us an opportunity, again, to, I think about equity and how we make the city better and more equitable.
Thank you, Lou, for chiming in. I think maybe Joel, would you like to go next? Your hand was up.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree with everything Lou just said about how the meeting is going. It's a very diverse task force, and that means a lot of perspectives, but it also means a range of familiarity with the existing process. So a lot of the time is bringing people together and focusing on the fact that this is a really processy effort, right? As Lou said, we're not changing plans. We're not changing what zoning means. We're not changing the centrality of neighborhood plans to rezoning. Instead, this is very processy. What does it take to apply? Who gets notified? What are the steps? And are there things we can do to improve equity along those lines? So Ian made a point early on that said, well, it's not really clear what you're doing here. There's not clarity. And it's this funny thing, right? If the city came in and said, here's exactly what we're going to do, the feedback might be on some other topic. The feedback, well, you've already decided what you're going to do. You're not listening to us. This is sort of hitting the other end of the spectrum, where the three broad categories that were laid out in the presentation that Sarah had up really are all there is. And then it's up to community feedback, it's up to the task force to say what processy fixes to advance equity can we imagine and build consensus on in those three broad areas. But that's all that's there so far. And while that feels broad and unfocused, it's also really right, because it's really open to everybody's ideas. So I struggle as sort of a process concrete person with how open it is, but I know that's because we're listening to everybody's ideas. Just a couple more thoughts. Ideas that INC has put forward, I think, have a really good opportunity to be brought to this and should be amplified. For instance, if we talk about equity and rezoning, one aspect is the notification process, the public participation process. INC has, I think in the last year or so, with regard to thinking of RNO ordinance and things beyond RNO, we called for broader access to notifications. So while notifications go to RNOs, and more recently rezoning specifically also goes by mail to nearby property owners, INC called for anybody should be able to subscribe to receive any notifications they want. We should push for that in this because we've got a spotlight. Another thing is rezoning is inherently technical. And so when you get notifications, even though they try to use plain language, there's inevitably going to be the names of zone districts and what does that mean? And I don't really understand what's happening here. My experience has been that reading a notification or reading a staff report is fine if you're already familiar with zoning, but if you're everybody else, it's Greek a little bit. It's not trying to be, it just is. But the process of watching a staff report to planning board or to city council, where a staff member with speaking and with visuals and just explaining it is something almost everybody gets. I think it's a shame that you have to wait all the way until a public hearing if you're someone who thinks they might be interested or just at least want to better understand what the proposal is to change zoning, to see the staff report delivered. I think it'd be fantastic to have that pre-recorded well in advance, so that you can, if you're interested, you can have somebody in a pre-recorded way, walk you through it. It's the same presentation they would give anyway. This is something Lakewood does that I think we should absolutely steal. And then to some other people's points, the applicant side for equity, I think we should look at who needs the most help, right? A developer with a team of lawyers does not need any help going through this process. But an individual homeowner who doesn't have a lawyer, unfamiliar with this, goes through just as lengthy of a process, except it's far more confusing for them. Or as Lou said, an affordable housing developer. Every dollar they have to spend on lawyers and stuff to go through rezoning process to get a rezoning that in the end is consistent with what our neighborhoods plans called for anyway, is money they have to take away from providing housing. So I don't have a specific solution, but what can we do to make it easier for those who need the most help? David Pardo talked about, legislative rezoning. So why is such a huge proportion of our rezonings individual homeowners going through the same process over and over to do ADUs rezonings when we can just apply them en masse, because that's what Blueprint called for? Can we accelerate that? That's quite specific to ADUs. Are there other things we can do with means testing? Or if you're providing affordable housing, maybe the city, the rezoning process, if it's needed, it's needed. The criteria is the same, but maybe the city does it for you. They walk it through the process for you. I don't know. Please show up to the meeting, give your ideas, because this is in an open forming kind of phase. Thanks.
Okay, so we have 3 more hands up from people who've already spoken. Eleni, I see your question about defining equity, and I kind of asked that in the beginning too. And it sounds like from what Lou said that the task force is still kind of grappling with that in their discussions. Does anyone want to add to that? Otherwise, I'll go back to Miles.
Yeah, I'll just add, we are using the definition of equity in Blueprint Denver, and then we've encouraged task force members, rather than at this moment coming up with a specific definition specific to this project, is to look at, when we set the goals forward and the objectives for the project, how do those achieve equity as well? And that becomes part of the conversation, looking at it from all angles of who's involved in this process: community members, city staff, city council, planning board, and applicants and whatnot. I think if we need to create a definition that's separate, that's something we consider. But at the moment, we're just encouraging that this is just part of the project and it's part of the conversation, and we need to look at it with any updates and anything that we're going to do or move forward.
Up maybe another 10 minutes on this, and then we'll move on. So Miles, did you want to go next?
Yeah, just a quick follow-up. I did like what Joel was saying, and I think if you could back up some of these needs with some quantities or qualifications. Like what Joel mentioned was the majority of the rezones are from homeowners. Well, I didn't know that. That's not stated anywhere. So what exactly is the issue you're trying to solve? That becomes part of, this is what we're trying to resolve. Homeowners maybe need some help in this manner. Now, the other thing too, I'll bring an example of like INC just did a change of bylaws, and the bylaws were posted earlier, but then at one of the meetings, they basically said, okay, here's the bylaws, make your comments and vote on it. So I almost wish there was a process where there was just a couple of open meetings where you could just discuss your concerns and walk through all of the issues. And I'd say the same thing with maybe even your problem statement. In trying to break this problem down, you first needed understanding of what equity is and how you're defining it and for whom. And that unto itself is a problem, and that should almost get public input, because the public may not agree with your definition. You have a lot of professionals on your committee, and they may be looking at it from a technical side versus the public going, wait a minute, I consider the homeless people part of the equity conversation. How are they being included? So again, I think the timeline is really short. And I think your process needs to have that input of, here's the definition, we'll refigure the definition per the input. And, should we be doing something else? That needs to be part of this question of equity and what the solution is. So again, I think the city needs to rethink its process. What does that mean? What is the criteria? What is success? What are the goals? How is our process equitable? And I think that will actually help you solve it and answer it and directly engage the people you need to engage. And then you can say, well, we heard from the citizens and this is what we consider equity, and maybe we need to tweak it. Maybe in the future, but it needs to be part of your process. All city processes should have a filter they put over it, and you move through and check the boxes. So that would be my comment, but thank you again.
Okay, I have a process question. If I want to submit comments and I would like everybody on your task force to get them and not just the city planners, how do I do that? Is that online? And you don't have to answer now, but it's just a question for everybody here, because I think I'm hearing a lot of people who may want to submit comments that don't stop with the city planners. And then Adrian, you're next.
Yeah, I want to go back to the area that Alani was exploring on equity. And I would make the following statement. City zoning, and indeed city planning, is inherently exclusionary. That's what it does. It excludes people. It is thus also inherently inequitable. How is the group going to deal with that paradox?
Can you say that again? Was the question, the rezoning process is inherently inequitable? Is that what you said? Sorry, I just want to make sure I heard the right thing.
Exclusionary. It stops people from doing stuff, and you have to go and get a new zoning so you can do whatever you want. And that has, that's where we got redlining. That's where we got all of the things that we have subsequently come to realize are problems for equity. That's why we got single family housing in areas which could really benefit from some multi-family housing. All of those things have turned out to be inequitable in that they play against the people whose equity we are trying, as I understand it in this process, to protect or even enhance. And I see that as a fundamental paradox with what you're trying to do. You're trying to equitably enforce inequity. And as such, I think you're trying to do something that's impossible. And so I think what you ought to be trying to do, going back to both Miles's comment and Joel's and my own, is make it easier for the disadvantaged to rezone, to get zoning. And that will open, hopefully, the floodgates of rezoning for improved equity by essentially removing most of the barriers that zoning creates.
Yeah, I think that's great feedback. And I think as we look at this project, one thing to consider is it's a piece of the puzzle. Like, we know we haven't gotten it right at the city. We know there's plenty of areas we can improve upon, from the zoning itself to how we go about processes and things like that. So with this project, we'll do as much as we can to address equity with the rezoning process. But the city does have other initiatives. We have other things that we'll be doing, other projects that will hopefully start to address kind of other concerns that you're getting at as well. So I think it's still good to hear kind of all of those concerns. So thank you.
Ian.
Hey, thank you. And I really appreciate, I kind of wish we would have started with Lou and Joel as well. For those unaware, my actual job, I work in environmental justice, and I'm the co-chair of the state's Environmental Justice Committee. And actually, historical narrative, equity analysis, definition redefining, engagement of Indigenous populations. These are all subcommittees that exist there. We're working on nearly a similar timeline. And honestly, we're oversighting dozens and dozens of processes just like this. But I think, common plain language, notification processes, these are things that were written into the Environmental Justice Act just this last year. And so I want to actually, Sarah, I'd like to reach out to you all and share what work has been done on our end from the statewide task force that is nearly mirroring this process. And I think a lot of the solutions are similar. There's also an historical analysis of redlining in Denver that was done by History Colorado that is in the documents, and I'll forward to everyone. And I really want to see environment included in this. I'm continuing to see density put into places where we know it's toxic, where air pollution, water pollution is at a certain level. And yet we that's where we put affordable housing. And to us, that's modern day redlining. So again, I would rather, I wish we would have had them start too, to explain from the community's perspective, but I'll be glad to reach out with more of those resources or talk to anybody here about the experience we're having at the state level as well.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Okay, David Pardo.
Yes, thank you. So yeah, the only thing, I think the folks who just talked brought up a bunch of good stuff, specifically Ian talking about where our affordable housing and where density is actually going in the city. To me, to be equitable, if let's say one part of town that was redlined in the past ended up with a certain type of housing, then that type of housing should equitably be allowed everywhere. So if we're going to say, okay, well, this area has always allowed for this type of density. The best example I can come up with is the Highlands, which obviously now is very expensive, but 20, 30 years ago was definitely a working class neighborhood. That's all zone TU, not SU. So if that's what was considered, normal, then why should we not have all of Cherry Creek, or, well, actually most of Cherry Creek is TU, all of the Country Club neighborhood be zone TU? And to me, that's what seems equitable. If we're going to talk about equity, we should be, up zoning areas to be the equivalent of what used to be, just the poorer neighborhoods. So that's really all.
Yeah, I think that's great feedback. And that's also, something that was identified in Blueprint Denver is maybe looking at a little bit of that idea of like missing middle housing. We know a decent amount of Denver is single family, and looking at there's kind of this missing area where it's areas where there's maybe a couple units and things like that. That will, I think, be a future project that we'll address. I know kind of the start of that project is what you'll hear about, I guess, next month with the ADU project. Is, before we look at potentially taking on that bigger issue, is looking at what are our standards today for accessory dwelling units and things like that. So that project will be looking at updating the standards and requirements for ADUs, and then we can look at how we might holistically, implement ADUs in the city as well. But you'll hear more about that. I'll let them talk about that.
Okay, I think this is fascinating, really important that it be discussed and get out widely. And I'm glad you could come today, but I would like to know, so you're saying if I want to share comments, and I have several about the pre-application process, which I think is entirely inequitable, even to neighborhoods who have people like myself who are nerds. It really isn't a question of one neighborhood versus another. The pre-application process is a real issue for me, but the only place I can get that input is to go to the April 5th meeting and say something.
The website does have a comment the website has a place where you can submit comments. We will be gathering everything we're hearing and sharing that back out with the task force and on the website. So it'll be, so the April 5th meeting is one place that you can do that, but there's additional opportunities, including just the website. You could go on there and send those to us. And
that's really important to me because I've seen other task force where the highly paid facilitators and helpers, and this happened with Blueprint, they pick and choose and reframe things and then send them out again and prepare them in really pretty diagrams. And so the raw data doesn't get really addressed. So, okay.
Yeah. And I put something in the chat that hopefully addresses a little bit of your comment that brings to light some of the ways that you can stay engaged. But I'll just reiterate what Liz said. We have the comment forms online. You can sign up to be on focus groups. You can also just email us. Another thing is the task force meetings are public, and we've been saving some time at the end of task force meetings. If other people are kind of observing, that then you can also give your feedback as well. So we've been having consistently a few people outside of task force attend, but haven't really been getting too much public feedback. So that's a time if you actually want to show up and say something so the task force hears it, that could be an opportunity. Otherwise, again, we'll be doing an extensive summary report of all the feedback that we've heard, how it was used, and what's kind of being moved forward, or how it's influenced the issue identification. So we'll definitely have that transparent and out there. And we're doing that because, like what Liz said earlier, we're still in that issue identification phase. We're still learning what the project should solve for, like what are the issues, and looking at it from all the different angles. So once we feel like we've heard from everyone and we are kind of understanding that, then we'll have all these summary documents and people can get definitely the bigger picture of where this project's going to head. So that I think will be probably at the end of April that we'll have those documents and things available.
Great. Well, we really appreciate Sarah and Liz, you coming here today, and Lou and Joel for giving us your feedback, since you're really way into this process. I appreciate the four of you, really. So thank you very much. And for the rest of you, stay tuned, because we're now going to go back to the city initiative, Expanding Housing Affordability, and talk about that a little bit. We don't have Annalise, but Ian is going to do the second presentation, and he's been working on that task force for a couple of years. So
Christine,
thank you.
Can we take a 5-minute break, actually? Because I think my computer is lagging and I'm not going to be able to present. So I'm going to need to send you the slideshow.
Did you say you want 5 minutes? Is that?
Yeah, I need 5 minutes because I think I need to send you the slideshow. My computer is going too slow, I think.
Okay. Well, why don't we let our morning presenters, early presenters off the hook, unless someone has another question for them, and we can just see if there's somebody who wants to share what's going on in their neighborhood or what their neighborhood is really concerned about right now in terms of zoning and planning.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I will hop off if there's no other questions. So thanks again.
Thank you, Sarah, Liz. Let's see, there's a couple of messages. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Bill Tanner, use it or lose it requirement. Some developers seek upzoning just to sell the upzoned property. I think that's being discussed. Is that correct, Lou?
Well, I just want to comment on that. So there are state statutes that provide for protection of entitlements for a period of time. And if there's not substantial money that goes to that project entitlement, they can lose that. But once a property is entitled, it becomes part of the value, and you really can't restrict that developer from selling the property as zoned. So I would just caution that at some point this gets into that pretty hairy legal area of who can develop. It's the same kind of conversation. Housing is housing, rental or ownership, and a lot of people think you should be able to limit what's entitled to ownership instead of rental, and that you cannot do those things, and you cannot say that only that person who upzoned the property can build it, because you get into some of those hairier legal issues. If that, hopefully, Bill, that helped answer your question. I'm happy to do some of, as Chris called it, the nerd discussions on some of the nuances of this kind of zoning.
Gertie, I see. Do you have your hand up to chat?
Yes. Well, I have one thing that, and I hesitated to say this during the presentation and when that was the focus, but one of my concerns about these broad changes that are coming to the zoning code is that, at least it's what I saw happen in the group living thing. And that is that the committee and the focus group get educated about what the issues are, but that information does not get out to the RNOs and doesn't get out to the community. So by the time the community gets involved, the issue can be explosive. And I really do think, and this is my own personal opinion, that if there had been more outreach earlier on in the group living thing, that people like me would have understood much more clearly what the challenges that the folks who were doing group living housing kind of things are facing. There would not have been the opposition. There would have not been as much opposition, because I think it's a question of education. And so I am just hoping that in this process, we can continue to hear regularly from the folks who are on that committee, because it is very hard for those of us who have other things in our lives beside planning and zoning to try to attend all the meetings. But my question, when Chris, you asked, are there issues that people are facing in their neighborhood? We just got a notice from the excise and license about a new liquor license application in our neighborhood, and there is no way to contact the applicants in that notice. And I thought there was an agreement that we would get that. When we asked for it, what they gave us was a web page, and that is not very helpful.
No, I thought we had resolved that.
Apparently not.
Okay, I don't know what to do about that right now. Let me just really quickly, Ian, can you hear me?
I can, and I'm gonna give it a go.
Oh, I thought maybe you wanted me to share. Okay.
I emailed them to you just in case, and why don't we see if it works, but my computer seems to be picking up speed.
Okay, well, you try, otherwise I'll share it for you.
Okay, there's just two things that we wanted to share with you. One, just to let you know that the next phase for the expanding housing options is going to be here in April at the planning board, and then there's some following steps. We sent that in the email with some dates for you. We also received some responses to your written questions that were submitted during last meeting that are on a slide we want to share with you. And then just this week at the task force meeting, there were some changes that were shared in response to the comment period that closed on the 14th of March. And so we just wanted to make you aware of those on Annalisa's slide. We tried our best to get the staff here, and unfortunately, due to spring break, they were unable to come. So these changes were just explained to me Tuesday, and I've read through it a couple times, but I'm probably not going to be as good at answering the questions as the staff. And so I think really the hope that we have here is that if there are questions, you can write them in the chat in addition to sharing them verbally if you'd like, so that we can capture them and get them answered in the similar way as these previous ones. So that being said, I'm going to try to share my screen. They're not really pretty slides. They're not the same font. I just got it yesterday, and we decided that it might be best to make it readable for you all. Let's see. Okay. So we don't know if we have recollection of who exactly asked these questions, but these are the questions that were asked. There were three of them that were responded to. And we're going to send them to you in an email as well. So someone asked about the percentage of total marijuana tax that was going to the Affordable Housing Fund. And then this walks through the different percentage rates. I'll leave it up here on the screen for a minute or two so people can read it. All right. The next one right here was about height incentives is applied to a very specific type of zone code along Downing Street, but they answered it for us. And so I think this is an example of no matter what question you're going to give, they're going to try their best to get the answers for us. And then this is the last one about prevailing wages. Oh, I forgot to put a space here. My apologies. And it's a question about prevailing wage and if it would be applicable, and it would only be if there were federal dollars that were being applied in a capital stack to construct a project. Okay, so now I'm gonna Now I'm gonna switch to this other slideshow that I was telling you about. This was just given to me yesterday, but we're going to include this also in the follow-up email. This was the last advisory board meeting. This is the slideshow that I saw. Let's see. That's about Zoom meetings, meeting norms. So this is just a reminder that, this thing started in March of 2021. Actually, it started even before that in 2020. And we relaunched the project as the changes had occurred for us to be able to actually do inclusionary housing. So it really has been almost 2 years that this has been going on. So this is this is the first one here, and then there's a table at the end. They were saying one of their first comments was that they wanted to improve transparency and reporting on the linkage fee and mandatory housing outcomes. So the suggestion that they talk about is creating some sort of tool that has a visibility for you to be able to see what's happening with the money and how much is actually being raised. The next one was that there were conversations that were had about transportation infrastructure and the ability around parking exemptions and incentives. We did have a fair amount of conversation about this because it was ultimately what they were recommending was only near the light rail stations, and some of the highest ridership are along the 0 and the 15 and the headways, and our built out network that we plan for at Denver Moves goes beyond just the light rail system. There was a conversation about what would be a high impact development and require a larger commitment. So here it talked about 10 acres or more, or tools that are financed with TIFs or metro districts. Ultimately, this one here, there's one more slide, I think. They talked about maxing out on the fees over time. And so now instead of immediately going to it, I think they're talking about a 4-year phase-in or a 3-year phase-in for the linkage fee itself. I'm going to skip to this. Okay, this is ultimately what they decided to do. So here on the right-hand side, from those recommendations, that the feedback they heard is that they want to create a dashboard for outcomes. They want to talk about only within a 1/4 mile, again, of just a fixed transit station, like a light rail station. They want to extend applicability to developments regardless of size that are using tax increment financing in metro districts. And they want to increase the linkage fees over a 4-year period. So there was a fair amount of discussion. I know that Nola Miguel couldn't be here today, but she had continued to raise concerns, which I think we would define as equity concerns on our end, about her community not getting, they're already behind the 8 ball and them feeling like they need a higher percentage in the community. They also, as this stands, would only go to 60% AMI. And so GES, whose AMI is 40% at 41,000, a lot of these people turned out to fight for inclusionary housing and then did not see the programs reflected. And then one concern that I've continued to raise, which is no emphasis on 2 or 3 bedrooms for both families and group living situations for people that bring their costs down. So those were just some of the discussions that were had. I think I should probably put this back up because I want again to go to what the process is going to look like for everyone. We put this in the email. We'll put it in the email again. But this is set to come to planning board, then land use and transportation, mayor council and first readings. They're not expecting any public comment there, but remember, you can always request public comment at city council if that's something you'd like. Doesn't necessarily mean it'll be granted, but you can request it. And then public comment, and if it were to pass, council hearing on June 6th, excuse me. So those are the updates. I would recommend people check out the website. And I do know Christine wanted to do a poll. I can try to pull that up if you'd like to.
No, I can just comment on it.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Well, I want to make one comment and then I want to ask you, like you asked Lou, for your feeling on this. I know this project is only limited. It's really not addressing housing affordability in general. It's just allowing it, addressing market rate housing and the incentives that go with market rate developers. So it's fairly limited, but whether you and the task force are happy with this, because that's a lot of material you just presented. So I would like to hear your opinion. And then my little comment is I have tried to use the dashboard tool, and in my opinion, it's just a waste of city money to create that unless they're just created for themselves. I am a nerd and I cannot get through, and the data Host has on its dashboard is limited to 2018. And it moves really quickly and you can't really get to the overlay you want. It's so hard to use and it's so hard to find. It doesn't pop up on the Host website. You have to Google dashboard for the Office of Housing and Stability. I mean, it's very difficult. So that's just a little comment. But do you want to just give your overview?
Well, I mean, yeah, sure, I'd be happy to. I mean, I think as far as dashboards go and all of that plain language explanation, I mean, we continue to come across this with all government processes, and I haven't found any of the dashboard tools to be particularly useful. But I also understand that they're trying to convey a lot of information simply to people who may just drop on the website. I hear where you're coming from. I have no idea what a dashboard costs. I think it's a reasonable question to ask on what that would cost to implement. We know that CPD has a rather large budget. We heard that just a couple of weeks ago, or maybe a couple of months ago when we had the executive here. You know, my experience on it was, again, it was really long. I think that there was some excitement on my end, I think, going into it, knowing that, you know, INC and community groups have been working for a long time to get to inclusionary housing. I think I was most disheartened to see that there wasn't a way to make it work to build some 40% units for people and for communities who I know advocated and turned out and like went to the capitals, you know. And I think that that's been challenging. I think the 2 to 3 bedrooms that I represented to you all, I think that to me is just, we heard very point blank in the first meeting from the developers, they make the most on single units. And, you know, it's about developing units that are affordable for the people. I know that there was a lot of frustration and there are not as many community people, I believe, ended the journey with us that started it. But then again, it was 2 years ago. But early on, there were some breakout groups that segregated us from the developers about financial feasibility. And I know that led to some very hard conversations and people like Nolan Miguel wanting to leave the process because, you know, the financial feasibility was conducted and some of the documents were shared, but I think just generally speaking, I think there was a large sense the developers had a lot of control over saying what was really possible. And, you know, at the end of the day, I pushed back, I guess I told you on the transportation questions, like, you know, and what the city we're trying to build for, but the meetings were accessible in Spanish. There was public comment available. They did come to INC a lot. They went to a lot of meetings, and they have a really strong record of what they documented, which I think is an improved process over other processes in the past. They did develop some cool animations and some videos, right? Like, so from a process standpoint, their website right now, I think, is much better than this equity and rezoning website. Just on how it works and how it feels and the landing pages, and so there's just different ways of going about it. But we consistently see this, that we the community members, I mean, granted, some of these people who work in the industry do live in our community, so I don't want to completely say that, but our voice is not always the majority.
Eleni, did you have a question?
Yeah, I thought that Nola, Miguel, and perhaps it was you too, Ian, were gonna submit a letter to INC because, kind of one of my big concerns, which I've said for years, is we really need to raise these impact fees. When you compare to peer cities, we're pennies on the dollar and they're charging 14, 15 per square foot. And then you're right, to Ian's point, the feasibility study that the city conducted said that we could be charging a lot more, but the developers said, and that the developers could afford it, but then they backed off of that and decided that they would phase it in. And because they felt that the developers, and these are big scale developers, need time to adapt to paying a little bit more. And these are still pennies on the dollar. I mean, we're not talking about massive shifts. When you look at like Boston and some of these other cities, they're charging quite a bit more per square foot, and they have rent control, and they've got other, kind of programs happening and tools in their toolkit that we don't have. So I was just curious if you all were going to, you wanted input from INC or kind of what?
Nola did approach the Colorado Latino Forum, which I'm also involved with and has been engaged in this process as well. And I think there is a letter that she's working on. As you know, there's been some changes just in the last few days. And so I think she would like to bring a letter forward before the planning board and through that process for people to take a look at. And, I have seen a draft of it, and it includes some of the concerns that I've shared, like the 2 to 3 bedrooms and the AMIs.
I mean, yeah, I initially sent my comments to the city and got back a form response saying, thanks for your comments, but we got to work with the developers. Like, they're going to solve the housing situation. And I'm like, we all know.
I don't know if the process has been, they don't think they've said this is going to solve the problem all along. I think that what they're saying is that the government has better solutions for this. And it's like, look, the government doesn't have enough money to carry all this. And I think that that's where the conversation intersects.
Okay, let's see. Cindy, I think you're next. Yeah.
Thank you. I concur with Eleni. I've always said that from the very beginning of the impact fee when we had the task force with many, many people involved. My second concern is that this blanket affordable housing upscale project is giving the developers actually greater incentive to tear down houses and to replace it with more expensive housing. I don't see it being the answer to affordable housing. It just doesn't make sense to me at all. And I don't see the balance in it. Like I said to Sarah last week, I've looked at it. It seems way too general. I don't know how to technically put my finger on it, but I don't see this as the solution.
Cindy, I'm going to ask Ian to address that because I think I'm confused, or we're confused about what we're talking about, because we're talking about the expanding housing affordability, which is for developers building apartments. Am I right, Ian?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, multifamily.
Yeah.
Yeah, my example was on Downing Street, it's a GMU3. And if you go from Colfax south, you have a lot of houses that are 1.5 stories, maybe 2 stories. So if you come in and you're able to upgrade to 4 stories, so that would be 4 stories shadowing houses next to it. And you can do, what is it, 10% affordable housing? That adds up to not that much, and they can make a heck of a lot of money on the other ones. So you're tearing down a lot of, quote, on the hill, affordable housing to get more expensive housing in mass and less really affordable homes. And they will be 1 bedrooms. They won't be 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms that these existing houses can accommodate, larger families. So again, we're making a neighborhood that has sort of mixed housing, more expensive housing. It doesn't make sense to me at all. That's been the trend. That's what I've observed. And I don't see this pushing, like we said in our small area plan, we do want mixed housing and we want more affordable housing. I don't see this solving the problem. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Ian, do you want to say something or
Nope.
do you, okay, let's continue then. Adrian?
Yes, somebody said that you went through a bunch of stuff, Ian, very quickly, and it's true. I guess I have an overall question. Is INC, going to take a position or whatever on all of this stuff? But the thing that caught my attention was an item on page 25 of your presentation, which says what the city heard was vehicle parking remains a need in many locations. And the city response, which really caught my attention, was revised vehicle parking exemption, that is when no vehicle parking is required, to only apply when the project provides enhanced affordability and is located within 1/4 mile of a fixed transit station instead of a transit corridor. As I read it, that really reduces the area where less parking is required, and provision of parking is fabulously expensive in developments. And so no matter who's doing it, and so, like $30,000 a car. So if you want to attack affordability, that seems to me to be a giant step for mankind in the wrong direction. Is the INC in favor of this, or the committee, or whatever?
So this is going to planning board shortly. So I don't think we can, even on the impact fee, I don't know that we can really do anything. And I don't know that there's agreement based on the comments from the last time Annalise was here. But I do hear you on the fact that they're not taking the opportunity for looking more at the whole Broadway corridor instead of just near transit oriented development. I hear you. But I'm just going to chime in on my transportation beef, which is that until we have mass transit, we can't get rid of the cars. So it's really a problem that I've been looking at since I moved here in 1981. And our transportation bus system is actually weaker now than it was in 81. We do have light rail, but the bus system isn't any stronger. So, but I hear you on that, and I don't think we can do anything at this late stage, but let's continue with, let's see, who else? David?
Yeah, so I've been following this from multiple perspectives as it's gone through the process. I've been involved with a couple of office hours that CPD and whoever was running it offered. The biggest thing that to me is a problem with this is not the percentages. Yeah, it would be great if we could have higher percentages of affordable housing or higher percentages or higher amounts per square foot that we were charging developers specifically for larger units. I don't think there's any value in increasing the fees for a developer who's building, types of housing that I live in, 400 square foot studios, but 424 to be exact. But we really should be hosing developers and in effect buyers who are buying, the new mansions that are replacing single family homes. If somebody can afford a 50 or a 5,000 square foot single family anywhere in the city, which means they're spending at least $2 million, there's no reason we can't hose them for a couple $100,000 for the affordable housing fund. So I think that I brought that up with them and they listened, but I don't know that it's going into the proposal. But if somebody can afford a large house, they should be hosed accordingly for money to provide for affordable housing. Whereas trying to hit a developer building 1-bedrooms and studio apartments and even, small or medium-sized 2 or even 3-bedroom units, there's not a lot of value there in making housing more expensive for those of us who aren't already wealthy. The other thing that was a big takeaway, but having talked to developers and working in development, though my world's commercial, most of them don't have too much of an issue with this. But they do talk about the fact that a lot of smaller developers who are providing housing that we desperately need in the city, that once the fees get to a certain point, they're inclined to pick up and go somewhere else where the fees aren't as high, whether that means that they're going across a border into Inglewood or whether that means they're going out of state. And at a time where houses have increased in cost by 20% in the last year, it's pretty obvious that we've got something that's going wrong. But my biggest issue with this really is that it's putting all of the expense on people who are first-time home buyers for the most part. Or on renters. If a developer out there builds 100 units of rental brand new, and it's a total of, let's say, 100,000 square feet in the building, that's going to be $400,000 that they're tacking on that gets charged to renters. Whereas the people in my mind who are causing the problems, no offense to all of you who are existing homeowners and who have owned in the city for a long time, this should be coming in the form of a higher property tax bill. Affordable housing is a problem faced by the entire city, and it needs to be covered by the entire city, not just by people who are renting in new buildings or buying new structures. That's really the long and short of it. This is a citywide problem. We need a citywide solution, not a solution that just affects people who are like me, who are young and who rent, and who are often the first people who move into a new building. Because believe me, the developers are not paying for this stuff out of their pocket. They're transferring it onto their tenants. They're transferring it onto the first-time home buyers buying the 1,300 square foot townhouse. People like me are paying this. It's not people like you, and it's not small, medium, or large developers who are paying these fees. It's me. And I'm down to pay it. I don't have a problem paying these fees, but this is a citywide problem. It needs to be fixed by everybody, and it should be done through a property tax increase that affects everybody, not just people who are moving to the city or have just graduated college.
I hear that, David, and our property taxes, having come from New York City for 30 years, are very low. So, but I just want to clarify with Ian, is this all multifamily property that's sold and rented? Ian?
Yes.
Sold and rented, correct? I just want to make sure I understand.
Yeah,
Okay.
having been involved, it's all property, whether it's sold, rented, or commercial or industrial, which totally fine to hose those guys too, in my opinion. But yeah, it's everything. It's everything that's a new build. But there's no transaction fee. If somebody buys a 5,000 square foot mansion that was built in the country club 20 years ago, and there's no money coming from that transaction. It's just from the new builds,
Okay.
not all homes that are sold.
Great. Thank you. Miles?
Yeah, just a few questions for Ian. In looking at the process that you've been involved with this, what would you have changed? What would you have liked to have seen them do? And then in looking at how the fees have been assessed, what is your opinion as to what did they miss, or what wasn't brought up? So how would you evaluate what has come together on this?
Well, I think, one of the, hold on a second, someone's coming in the door here. One of the things that I was talking about there was the 40% AMI, right? I think that 40 to 60% range, there are a lot of communities in West Denver, in these formerly redline communities, where I think we'd like to see that more. In regards to process improvements, one of the things that I think is really important, I've talked to the city about, is having kind of a commitment from people like me who participate to help with the outreach and actually tracking that, because I think that that's the additive fact and beyond what the staff is just doing. And I think there needs to be more of that, just generally speaking, for task forces and commissions and things that get set up, is getting a buy-in and training those individuals to also conduct outreach and work towards those goals.
So I'm hearing a lot of comments, and these all really should go to the city. And I'm looking at the city website right now. And when you Google expanding housing affordability, there's a link down at the bottom right where you can actually just put your comments in a form. If you don't have the time to write a letter to all of council or planning board and Annalise, there's a form. So everybody Google expanding housing affordability and Denver, and you will see the form on the bottom right, the link to the form. So all these comments can get in. And it sounds like some of you have already submitted comments, David and Eleni.
I would just also add, and I think I said this before, Miles, but I do agree that they made recommendations for higher thresholds than ultimately we received here. So I do think more percentages could be available, and I think a deeper AMI would be good. And then again, I come back to, like, from day one, I talked about 2 and 3 bedrooms, and to not see it be represented in here after we brought it up over and over again is discouraging.
Okay. Great. Okay, well, this has been good.
Can I follow up with Ian real quick? Just a quick
Yeah.
question on the 2 and 3 bedroom. But that change could be made in the building code, couldn't it? It could become a requirement.
I don't know the answer to that question.
But if that was one of the goals from the city, they could say, if you're building so many units, you are now required to build so many 2 and 3 bedroom units. So that could be something city council could do, I would suspect, in the city and county of Denver.
I wanted to talk about that really quick as a renter, who I think that that's incredibly valuable in certain places within the city. But, I don't know that there are a lot of families trying to live in, let's say, Rhino, where I live. And so if you I live in a building that's mostly studios and 1 bedrooms, and we have the percentage of vacancies within our 2 bedroom units, which are already limited, is higher than in the 1 bedrooms and the studios because of the specific part of the city in which we're in. So while I think it's an awesome idea to increase the number of 2 and 3 bedroom units that are built citywide, it really should be done on a neighborhood or a type of, what part of the city you're in basis, as opposed to a blanket, because I don't think if my building had a whole bunch of 3 bedrooms in it, we would see a whole lot of families move into this building. I can tell you You know, we've got, I think this building has almost 400 units. We're at over 500 residents in my building that share 3 elevators. There are 2 adults that share custody of 1 child that live in the building.
David, but I think what you're missing here is the definition of family, right? And it's not just about having children. And there also are people who are from that community where I grew up in Cole and in Curtis Park that are searching for affordable housing, multiple units for their families, no matter how they define them. I think it's something that is shared everywhere. I don't think it's fair for us to say, just because there's a lot of bars in that community, that families might not want to live there. We see that in other districts around the city.
No, two good points. And but again, I think the city could address some of this. That there could be an overlay or look at different circumstances. But I think that's something the city could add to its building code.
I'm not opposed to having, you know, larger units in any part of the city. I'm just questioning, and like I could be totally wrong, but from my experience of living in the larger apartment buildings for the last 9 years, in 4 different buildings, like I haven't seen a lot of, like, maybe it's just because of the types of buildings I've lived in, but I haven't seen families try to move into these types of buildings. That's just my personal experience.
I think there have been some studies in Europe where they mixed all different classifications of income and size of units together in one building, and it ended up being a much more cohesive community. And so maybe I'd just say, for somebody to say, we're just going to build all studios, yes, it may be economically viable, but for the society, you would be better off to be required to do a whole range of units and bring all different types of people together. It would be beneficial for the society.
So thank you, Ian, for the update. I hope people are going to submit their comments. I mean, I know it takes a while to write them and formulate them, but please do. If we're kind of wrapped up on that, I was just wondering if there's a couple of new people on the call. I see a couple of people like Mike Henry I haven't seen in a while. I see Alan. I'm just wondering if anybody else who we haven't heard from has something to ask or add or just say hi or what they're working on. Be good to hear from a few more people. Okay. Mike, you don't want to say hi? Oh, Gertie, you want to say, or Alan, you want to say hi?
I'd like to say hi. I'd like to make one comment. I hear all of these comments about limited access to affordable housing, and I keep trying to find out why the model of housing that I lived in New York City for 5 years on Roosevelt Island hasn't been tried anywhere else. And that is all of the units on Roosevelt Island that were built in the 70s. It has many more market rate units now, but the original 5 buildings that were built there, which are each of which is quite large, with a great mix of different sizes of units, all built to the same standard. The requisite to live in those dwellings was residence in the state of New York for 1 year and the ability to file with the management your New York State income tax return, which would be the sole determinant of your rent. So there was as an example, I was making a fairly substantial salary at that time, and the lady across the hall from me with 2 children was from Panama, I believe, and had been divorced from her husband. She worked at the UN and could work nowhere else because she didn't qualify for green card. And she had relatively small amount of income, and she was in the same quality apartment that I was. And that was characteristic of the entire place. There also was one building, there was a condominium where if you bought in the condominium building, you did not have the privilege of reselling your apartment at anything above the current or the original purchase price. So I don't know whether any of these models could be applied anywhere else, or whether they're still in effect in New York City, as a matter of fact. But it was a New York State program, and there were many such projects in New York.
Alan, Cindy is asking if it falls under, if it's rent control that established that or something else.
This was not rent control, and the name of the program fails me, so I can't tell you, but it was a special program under the Housing Authority of the state of New York.
And Roosevelt Island is still going strong.
Yes, and it has market rate housing in much greater quantity than the original development.
Well, thank you for that.
Also has a university, of course. I would mention one other thing. You'll notice that my background is Bobby R. Park, and tomorrow Kendra Black is sponsoring a Ukrainian solidarity event at Bobby R. Park at noon tomorrow, and anyone who has a tendency to support the people of Ukraine should try to attend.
At noon, Alan?
Yes.
Okay.
And anyone who doesn't know where Bobby R. Park is, it's at Yale and Havana.
Gertie, your hand is up. Did you have another comment?
Yeah, I'm just happy to see Mike Henry's name, even if we're not seeing his face. And it's also good to see Alan and have Alan share his wisdom and his wonderful experience. I'm just glad to see some people with white hair, or no hair, but white hair back with us.
And I see some brand new people that I just don't know. Like, I don't know Mike Cox. Did you want to say hi or tell us who you are, or your RNO, or what, or Bill Killam? I mean, there's the people I don't know, and it's great.
Sure, I'm happy to make a quick introduction. I'm going to be the new zoning lead for University Park Community Council, and kind of I'm brand new to the position, so I don't know exactly what that means, but our president Steve Hicks said to join this morning and kind of get on the inside loop, if you will, and I like seeing that there is discussion around these issues. I think that these are very, very big and very serious things that our communities face. And the way that they grow and become bigger problems is by turning the other cheek. So glad to see that there are people engaged, and I'm glad to be a part of this. So from my little neighborhood over here by DU is I learned a lot in the 2 hours here. So thank you, and happy to kind of be here.
Well, it's great to have you here. And I don't know if you're on the zoning planning list and got this email, or someone forwarded it to you, but we need permission to add you if you're not on it.
Permission granted is
Okay.
that it was forwarded to me. So tell me what I need to do.
Put your email in the chat and I can add it. And Bill Killam, I don't know you either. Welcome.
Hi, yeah, I'm the chairman of the Zoning and Planning Committee for Brun. I've been working on the committee since 2016. I work real closely with Robert Schmidt and was just sitting in today with Inc. because Robert is the usual participant, I believe, and he couldn't make the meeting. So yeah, I've been working closely with the ADU issues, the support. I note that our councilwoman and her staff is very supportive of the people, the individual applicants in our neighborhood who are going for rezoning, specifically for ADU issues. And it would be, I think, the comments on supporting that in our previous conversation is really important, because I do see our local residents struggling to figure out what the heck they're supposed to do to try and get their property rezoned. So I do support that, and have been working in this neighborhood for and living in this neighborhood for quite a number of years, and will continue to work with Robert on these issues.
Great. Well, it's good to have you, and you can come anytime, even if Robert is also here.
Thank you.
A couple other people. I don't know Sean Brady. Do you want to say hi? You don't have to. I'm just. Okay. Anybody else? Okay, well, should we wrap up then, Ian? Is that okay?
Yes, and we're going to be sending up all these following information with you, and we're going to have the ADUs next week or next month, so make sure you tune in for that. I'm not sure if I'll be here with you or not. It's the day after my birthday, and Earth Day and my job is a lot, so I'm not sure if I'll be present, but I'm going to try.
Is your birthday on Earth Day?
Yes, it is, which is Friday. And then, but I got like 5 events already scheduled that week I got to speak at. So, and if anybody wants to follow up about the Environmental Justice Task Force, I know, it's not necessarily a part of this, but I don't know if you saw this in the news yesterday, but the EPA rejected the Suncor permit from the state of Colorado, which is the first time since 1999. And that's how I felt, Gertie, citing environmental justice, cumulative pollution, our non-attainment zone. And they're now signed an MOU and are going to be opening up CDPHE for Title VI and civil rights concerns. So it is a
Wait, what do you mean? What do you mean opening up? They're going after
they're going to be reviewing all of their processes for compliance with Title VI, the Civil Rights Code.
Great. Well, thank you everybody for joining us. Just listening month after month, I hear so many concerned people and so many differences of opinion, and I am thankful that we can all share our opinions here. It's not always easy, but it's really important, even if it's not the prevailing opinion. So thank you for coming. See you.
Chris,
Yeah.
Question, is the next month's meeting on the 4th Saturday or the last Saturday?
April 23rd, unless there's a reason.
April 23rd. Thank you.
Yeah, is that a huge Earth Day event day, the whole day? I mean,
I don't know.
So right now it's scheduled for the 23rd. We already have Josh Palmari lined up from CPD to talk about the new citywide initiative on looking at ADUs in different neighborhoods. Amanda Sandoval is proceeding with more in her area, as Bill said, but this is a more citywide comprehensive discussion. So.
Thank you.
Okay, see you all on April 23rd.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.